Hello, and welcome again to Cindy's Country Kitchen. Today we are going to make cinnamon rolls, and cinnamon rolls has been very popular from my kitchen, so I hope it's something that you will enjoy making. Let's take a look at the recipe. Now, this is actually a Paula Deen recipe. I know she's fallen out of favor, but I got it off the Food Network and I do like the recipe, so this is what I use. We're going to have 2¼ teaspoons of active dry yeast. And if you don't buy your yeast in bulk, if you buy the packages, 2¼ teaspoons is the same as one package of active dry yeast. A half a cup of water, and the water should be in the 95 to 100 degree range, 101, 102. Anything over 120 degrees will kill the yeast. So it's important to know what the temperature is of the water. Half a cup of scalded milk, 1/4 of a cup of sugar, 1/3 of a cup of unsalted butter, soft, 1 egg, and 3½ to 4 cups of all-purpose flour. So this is the ingredients for the dough, and there's other ingredients for the filling and for the glaze on top. But we're going to start with this, of course. So the water is in my pot and it's warmed up, because the first thing we're going to do is soften the yeast. Now I have this handy dandy little instant read thermometer. You can find them in almost all kitchen stores. You don't have to pay $100. You can get one a lot more reasonable than that. So let's see what we have for water temperature in my half a cup of water. And there's markings on the side of this, so I know. All right. So this water is 95, 96, 97.9. Perfect. So let's put in our one package, 2¼ teaspoons of yeast. Now, I actually have a measure that is 2¼ teaspoons just for measuring out yeast. So I'm going to level it off, plop it in. Give it a nice stir, let it start softening and activating, because that's what happens when you put active dry yeast in warm water. All right, so while we're waiting for that to do its thing, and it usually takes at least 5 minutes for it to fully activate in the water. So in a recipe like this, you're going to do it first before you do the other things. Now I'm going to scald my milk. Now you remember that scalded milk is not boiling, but it's really, really hot to the point where you can see the little bubbles around the edge of the pan. So let's turn this on. And you're also going to see steam coming up off the milk. And you might even see a little bit of a skim forming on top. And that's all perfectly okay. All right, so my milk is now scalded. I can see steam coming off it. So I'm going to pour my scalded milk into this bowl. It's only half a cup. And then I'm going to add my 1/4 of a cup of sugar. the salt, the melted butter. Well, it's not really melted, but it's soft. The soft butter. And soft is good because you don't want to sit around all day waiting for this to dissolve. So I'm going to mix this in. You got to make sure that it's already started to cool down because we have to mix in our egg. And as you know, you put an egg into hot ingredients and the egg might start to scramble up, congeal, do things that you don't want it to do. I want to be able to mix it in, not have it cook. So here's my one egg. I'm going to crack it. Notice this time I didn't crack it on the bowl. I'm going to put the egg in because you don't want to get shell if you can help it. Put it in this nice little bowl so I can take a look at it. Looks wonderful. And now I'm going to mix it in because my pan has already started to cool down. There. Mix, mix, mix. Now, it's not at all unusual that the butter hasn't all worked itself through. I mean, if I softened it more, if it was practically almost melted, then it might mix through faster. But that's okay because it's going to get mixed in once I start adding the flour, and so it won't be a problem. Could you do this on a stand mixer? Sure, you could if you wanted to. I just happen to be used to doing it in a bowl with a wooden spoon. If you did it on a stand mixer, after you did it with the blade and got all the ingredients put in, then you could switch to a dough hook for the kneading portion. All right, so how's the yeast looking? Oh, the yeast is looking beautifully bubbly. I don't know if you can get a good look at that, but it looks just the way yeast is supposed to look. So now we're going to scrape this into our bowl. Try to get all the bits of yeast off this little spoon that I used. All right, so once this is stirred in nicely, we're going to start adding the flour. Now, it says 3.5 to 4 cups of flour. It's the kind of thing where you have to have enough practice to know, how much, do at least 3.5 cups, and then is it the right consistency? Is it thick enough? Is it smooth enough? And as you're kneading it, you're probably going to be sprinkling on some more flour. So I started out with my 3.5 cups. And actually, this is 3 cups. Now, I can add the flour all at once. And now I've already measured this in my measuring cup. My 3 cups. And then what I'm going to do after I stir this in, now you see this is a sweet bread. We can call it a bread. And it's enriched. It's got a little sugar. It's got fat in it, like the butter and the egg. So it's not bread in the traditional sense. It's a sweet dough because we're making something sweet with it, like cinnamon rolls. All right, so we're going to add in a little more flour. Now, I waited for the last bit to remind everybody how to measure flour volume. You go into your flour container, and I, of course, am using King Arthur all-purpose flour. You scoop it up, kind of move it around a little bit, fluff it up, measure it in a cup. Nice. Don't pack it, just kind of gently fill the cup, level the cup, and that's how you measure flour in volume, meaning in cups or tablespoons. Now I'm going to put in about half of this, and I'm going to save the other half for the kneading process. Now the instructions say you should knead it for something like 10 minutes. 10 minutes is a long time when you're kneading by hand. So I may not do 10 minutes, but I know what to feel for. I know what the texture should be. I know how soft it should be. So I'm going to throw a little flour onto my breadboard. I'm going to scrape it out. Actually, I'm going to get my bowl scraper because I don't want to waste any of the dough if we can help it. It's always nice to have a variety of big bowls if you're going to be doing a lot of baking. I have these Pyrex bowls in all different sizes. I even have one bigger than this. All right, so now we're going to get our hands into it. Kneading is a very satisfying process, I think. You know, you get to really feel what you're doing. If you don't like handling the dough, then you shouldn't be a baker. These bowl scrapers are also handy for picking up bits off the breadboard. I call this a breadboard because I use it whenever I'm kneading a yeasted dough. If I'm doing like baking powder biscuits or rolling out cookie dough, I don't use my wooden breadboard. I have a plastic board that's good for that. But there's just something about yeasted dough on a wooden breadboard, just the firmness of the board and the way you're allowed to push against it. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. If you don't have a breadboard, if you don't have something special to do your kneading on, you can do it on your countertop if you have to. Just make sure it's really clean. Make sure it's not going to stick, that you've put down some flour. And, you know, there's always ways to make things work if you want to. All right, it's really getting soft. Put down a little bit more of my last half a cup of dough. I may or may not use all of it. I will decide as I go along. Fold the dough towards you. Press with the heels of your hand because there's a lot more strength there. It feels so good, so soft. It's getting really smooth. And has it been 10 minutes? No, it hasn't. I don't know exactly how long it's been. Like I said, you learn as you go. You can't expect everything to be perfect the first time you try it, but the trick is you don't stop trying just because it doesn't come out perfect the first time. I can't tell you how many times I worked on perfecting things before I really got it. Like macarons. I worked so hard a couple years ago to correctly make macarons, and they're fussy, and it took me several tries, but I finally got it. Practice, 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 practice. All right, now I'm just going to kind of knead it in my hands so I can get a closer look at the dough. Is the flour all absorbed? Is there any flour that's not? Does it have room to take in more flour? That's what we're looking for. I'm trying to get the bits of flour that are on the breadboard. All right, I think that is going to be enough flour. I'm not going to try to force it to absorb anymore. So once I'm happy with the texture of the dough, the softness of the dough, the color of the dough, oh, and it smells wonderful too, then I'm going to let it rise. So I have my dough buckets, and I've never done these cinnamon rolls in a dough bucket before, so I don't know how much room it's going to need to rise. I usually put them back in the bowl, but now that I have these dough buckets, I figured, hey, gotta use them. So I think I'll use my bigger dough bucket, which holds up to 6 quarts. My other one holds up to 2 quarts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my dough bucket, I'm going to spray it with a little canola oil spray so that it doesn't stick to the sides. Plop it in, and I'm going to let it rise. The instructions say you're going to let it rise until it doubles. Could be an hour, could be an hour and a half. May need even an hour and 40 minutes. You got to look at it. You got to see. And that's the beauty of the dough buckets is I can see how much space it's occupying now, and I can watch it grow. So it's going to rise now on my rising mat. And when I come back, we will have some beautiful dough that will be ready to go further on and put the filling. So here we are, and we'll be back. Hello, and we're back with the cinnamon roll dough that has been rising now for about an hour and a half, hour 35 maybe. And this is what it looks like. It's come up nicely in this bucket. I didn't need all 6 quart bucket, but it's a little bit more than 2 quarts. So good. So I'm gonna sprinkle some flour on my breadboard, my work surface, and prepare to get it stretched out. Oh, we should look at the ingredients for the filling. All right, so here we go. So for the filling, we're going to take 1/3 to 1/2 cup of melted butter. Melted butter goes I melt a whole half a cup and it seems like way more than I need. So I go somewhere between a third and a half. And same thing with the sugar. It may call for 3/4 of a cup of sugar, but I go somewhere between a half and 3/4. And I do put in the 2 tablespoons of cinnamon. And chopped nuts are optional. If you want chopped nuts, put them in. If you don't, don't. And you could also put in some dried fruit, maybe chop up some raisins or dried cranberries or dried apricots, whatever pleases you. So, and we'll look at the glaze a little later. All right, so there's the flour on my work surface, and we're gonna look how nicely the dough pops out. And we're gonna stretch it and move it around. I start out with my hands, and then I'm gonna switch to my rolling pin. Now, it all depends on how big you want to make your cinnamon rolls. The recipe says you roll them out to, I think it's 15 by 9, 15 by 8, something like that. But excuse me, if you want them fatter, you'll get less, obviously, but the ones you do get will be so big and round and full that might be okay with you. So I have my handy dandy ruler here. And right now I have this rolled out to 9 by, I'd say there's 12, and that's probably another 4 inches, so 9 by 16. So that's pretty good. So I'm going to even the edges, because when we roll them up, we want the edges to be nice. And I can stretch it and manipulate it with my hands. That's okay. You don't want the dough at the very ends to be too thin. All right. This dough is just so nice and soft. All right, so now I'm going to take my pastry brush and my melted butter, and I'm going to coat the surface with the melted butter. And in the instructions it says you want to make sure you have enough melted butter to coat the inside of the pan. And these get baked in a 9 by 13 pan. So here we are, slathering on the melted butter. Nice and thick, because this is going to give us a lot of flavor. There. And then I'm going to spread melted butter on the bottom of my baking pan. Now, the noise you hear is I'm actually spreading it on top of a piece of parchment paper. Out of an abundance of caution, I don't like the bottoms to get too super brown. So I kind of also cut a piece of parchment paper just to the right size and lay that in. And then I'm going to do the edges also, because that's what you do. All right. And I still have butter left. So now I'm going to take the cinnamon sugar and sprinkle that on, making sure the cinnamon is mixed in well. Because what's cinnamon rolls without cinnamon sugar? Yum, yum. And it should be enough to just do a nice thin layer over the top of the whole thing. And It is. And chopped nuts are optional, but I do have some chopped walnuts that I'm going to, I don't know, maybe I have half a cup. I didn't measure because I'm like that. I'm just kind of distributing them, hopefully, over the top. So now you're going to start at the bottom, and this is the long end, the long edge, and you're going to flip it over just, a half inch of the bottom, flip up and over. And this is how you're going to roll these up. And you're going to try to make it fairly tight. So as you're flipping, give it a little press down as you go. There. And once you get started, of course, it's much easier. But I try to, give it a nice little press. We don't want them to be too loose. And they're going to have a second rise. So during the second rise, the layers are kind of cling together anyway. All right, we're getting there. We are getting there. And I kind of pull, if the top edge has kind of rolled back, I kind of tug it out a little bit so that it meets the roll. And usually the outer edges, the two edges, aren't the most beautiful. And those are the ones that if you promise somebody in the house a sample, those are the ones you give them. Right? Okay, so here's our roll. And out of this roll, I can get, now you could, there's all kinds of ways you can do this. You could be very precise and measure it and estimate how many inches you want to make them. I don't do that. But please do if that's important to you. If you want them all to be exactly the same size. I want them to be close to the same size. I know the one on the end isn't going to be that pretty. I take a really sharp knife, and I could go through and kind of mark out ahead of time. And that's what I'm doing. I'm kind of marking out so that I know that when I come to the other end, yeah, that's good. And now I'm just going to go ahead and cut. I've seen people do it with like dental floss, make a, loop dental floss around it to make a nice cut, or I don't know what else they would use. But anyway, I use my really sharp knife. Go through, slice them all. Don't slice any fingers because the fingers don't taste good with cinnamon rolls. You could make them a lot taller if you want. Again, personal preference. How big do you want them to be? How many do you want to get? It's all up to you. So now I'm going to lay these in my pan. And you have to realize that they are going to spread apart a little bit because they are going to have one more rise. And that's a 15-minute rise. So here we go. Here we go. How many did I get? 9. Oh, I got some nuts falling out. So I'm just going to kind of take the nuts that are falling out and find a spot and put them back in. I got like a dozen nice ones and maybe 3 that are, kind of wonky. The 2 ends especially. Although this end isn't bad. And then if there's sugar and cinnamon left on the cutting board and nuts, I kind of scoop it up and, like I said, just kind of spread it over the top of them. Now this is going to get covered up with some plastic wrap, and it's going to go back on my warming mat for 45 minutes. And at which time we'll take a quick peek at what they look like and put them in the oven. So you can look forward to that. The cinnamon rolls have sat for 45 minutes on the warm mat to finish their rising. This is what they look like. You can see that they've definitely expanded in size. So now I'm going to pop them into the oven. The oven's been preheated to 350, and they're going to bake for about 30 minutes. I'll probably start checking them at 25 minutes. And then we will take a look at them and we will make the glaze that's going to go on top of them. So that's what I'm going to do. And then I'll be back when they're done baking. The cinnamon rolls are out of the oven. I baked them for about 26 minutes, but they're nice and golden brown on top, and that's what we definitely want to see. So I'm going to mix up the glaze that goes on them. And the recipe for the glaze is 4 tablespoons of butter, soft. Doesn't matter if it's got salt or unsalted, I don't think. I use regular salted butter. 2 cups of sifted powdered sugar, a teaspoon of vanilla or more, and 3 to 6 tablespoons of hot water. Whatever you need to get it the consistency that you want it to be. So my butter's been softened by sitting on top of the stove while it was baking the rolls. I sifted the powdered sugar. I'm gonna put in most of it, reserving the right to make it a little bit thicker or not. Add some hot water, a couple tablespoons, I should say, to start. And absolutely a lovely splash of my vanilla. I'm very generous when it comes to how much vanilla I put in. So just stir this up, nothing to it, comes together easy. I don't bother to, use a blend, any kind of a mixer for it. You want it to be thin, but not too thin. And you don't want the cinnamon rolls to be so hot when you pour it on. You want them to be mostly cool. It is going to run all over, and maybe that's a good thing. A little bit more sugar. Again, if you make these a couple times, you'll figure out what you want for the exact amount of sugar and water and butter and vanilla. It's personal preference. It's just do it. Don't be afraid. All right. This looks pretty good. It looks like kind of glaze you would pour on a cinnamon roll. Now, like I said, I usually just pour them all over, but I'm going to freeze half of these. And so I don't want to coat them with the frosting glaze until I take them out of the freezer to deliver them to the place that they're going. So I'm going to just take off a couple that are going to get eaten here at home and coat them with the frosting. And the frosting shouldn't be so terribly thick. It should kind of run off the spoon, as you can see. And as they cool, it thickens up. So that's what we're doing. And that's our little cinnamon roll lesson for today. Now, they're too hot to handle still, so I'm not going to try to take one out yet. But there, cinnamon rolls, there they are. There's the frosting. And I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you try it. The recipe, as always, is in the first comment. Leave me more comments if you have any questions. Subscribe to my channel because there's other things that you might want to bake that I've demonstrated, and there'll always be more coming along. So goodbye for now from Cindy's Country Kitchen.